Sweet,
Yeah.
sweet. We've got Pete here today, as you know, but we also have a special guest. We have Majean Phillips, Manager, Customer Implementation Team. So you guys are in for an extra special treat. Before we get into it, let's give folks just a few minutes to hop on. But I know I want to know about summer plans now that we're wrapping up. So Majean, how's your summer been? Do you have a highlight reel for us?
Yeah. So we were patrons at Summer Stage in Central Park, and we got to end up seeing like 40 great concerts this year. It's been really fun. And I'm hoping for like one more trip to the beach before summer wraps at Labor Day.
Absolutely. That sounds great. Do you have any beach activities, or are you more of like a hangout, just chill day off?
Definitely cooler,
Yep,
towel,
that's it.
chill.
Absolutely. Okay, Pete, how about you? What you got for us? I know you've been busy with travel.
Yeah, well, I think I've been doing a lot of business travel, which has been pretty cool. Like this last week, I was at, or sorry, gosh, I guess today's Thursday. Monday and Tuesday, I was at Sales Love Conference in Austin. It was absolutely fantastic. And then yesterday, I was at Battery Ventures Sales Leadership Summit here in San Francisco. All of them were like super great because it's fun to see a bunch of our customers, meet new folks, meet new sales leaders, hang out with partners, etc. It's lots of fun.
That's awesome. Busy guy. Now we get you this morning. Perfect. Okay. Well, we can go ahead and get started. Looks like we had quite a few folks join us, so we are
All right.
we're all set to go. We've got Sink or Swim, managing your reps through a downturn today. We'll get to more formal introductions of our speakers in just a bit, but first I'm just going to cover some bases here. So first and foremost, before we begin, today's event is indeed hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our 27,000 and growing members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they may not know about. So we do that through live sessions like this one that you're going to see today. We also have our online forum, in-person events, and upcoming summits, which I will get to in just a moment. So if you are not in the community yet, you will be added very shortly, and we would love to see you here more often. So as I mentioned, we've got a summit coming up, which is super exciting. We're just getting into announcing and getting everything together. We can't wait to have you. If you like this content, you will love the 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening October 11th through the 13th. We've pulled together 24 events of amazing content and speakers. You can hear from the CEO of ZoomInfo, Gainsight, Cowboy Ventures, and Winning by Design, as well as many sales leaders at Lattice, Pendo, Outreach, Atrium, and more. So I will drop you that link to sign up in just a bit, but you don't want to miss this one. It's going to be killer. And to cover our last bit before I hand it off to our speakers for the day, we are all excited to dive in. But first, for housekeeping notes, if you have a question for Pete or Majean, please use the Q&A function or the chat, and we would love to get to them during the event. And yes, the event is being recorded. You will have access to the recording and key takeaways, all that good stuff, in a follow-up email from me shortly after the event. So for the fun stuff, we are sponsored by Atrium today. As many of you know, Atrium is the founder and parent company of MSP, and I'm going to go ahead and let Pete introduce Atrium and Majean and just run it from here. Thanks, guys.
Sure. Thanks, Joni. Hey everyone. Yeah, so just a little bit on Atrium. We make data-driven sales management software that exists to help sales organizations, sales managers, sales leaders use metrics and data to improve team performance. Super easy to set up. You just log in with your Salesforce account. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes to turn on a free Atrium account, and presto change, you have a world-class data-driven sales management analytics harness. So I'm really excited to talk today about managing sales organizations in a downturn. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of introductions here. So, I so my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm the founder of Atrium. I'm also the CRO here. Been working on Atrium for about 5 years now. Prior to Atrium, I started a software company called TalentBin that was a recruiting software company that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. Subsequent to that, I wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and then um, I also started Modern Sales Pros. So that's a little bit on me. And Majean, I would love for you to introduce yourself, please.
Of course, my name is Majean Phillips. I am the manager of the customer implementation team here at Atrium. I've been at Atrium for about a year now and love digging in and helping, I think, close to 60 different accounts with their data-driven sales management at this time. Prior to Atrium, I was working in music as well as management, founding small companies. And then before that, it was public relations. So it's exciting to take that experience and come to Atrium and work with so many great sales leaders.
Nice. And I'm super pumped to have you with us today because you interact with lots and lots and lots and lots of modern sales organizations that contend with, the different challenges that we're going to be talking about today. Before we get further along, I think we actually have an offer to share with everybody who's attending today. One of the things that we like to do here at Atrium is to make our customers and the community better at sales management, SDR management, AE management, et cetera, et cetera. Our software does that through data-driven sales management, so helping organizations use data and metrics to better measure and manage and improve the performance of their reps and teams. But we also like to help people just be better managers in general, even outside of like the math stuff, right? The metric stuff. And so one of the ways that we do that is we host a sales management boot camp on a recurring basis every month. And if folks want to go ahead and attend that, go ahead. We're going to go ahead and drop a link here in the chat for folks to do that. And actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my screen here, and I'm going to share my screen since I'm going to be, and by share my screen I mean turn off my camera. Good job, Pete. Learn how to use software. I promise I run a software company. Cool. So yeah, our buddy Richard Harris here has been, we've been having him host both a sales management and a sales leadership bootcamp. We actually have both. We're going to go ahead and drop the link for folks to sign up for that. If normally it would be $1,000. This sort of thing would be like $1,000 to attend. It's a 4-hour boot camp, kind of like half day ish. Hosted virtually. Richard's an amazing sales trainer, but he's particularly great at enabling sales managers and sales leaders. So if you want to go ahead and sign up for that, go for it. All we ask for in exchange is a quick discovery conversation with our team on how you're using data to improve the performance of your team. Wonderful. So, Majean, you ready to talk sales management at a downturn?
Yeah, I mean, it's never a fun topic, but it's a necessary one. So I'm ready.
Totes. Cool. So we got a lot of content to cover here. So we're going to be racing along. Importantly, like these are kind of the major topics we're going to be covering. Essentially pivoting a team, right? Like how to adjust when things kind of get weird. Finding new baselines in a sales motion. This is going to be kind of around like using data to understand like what the quote unquote new normal might be for an organization. Driving enhanced effort and efficiency in AE teams, and then AE and SDR teams, and then also management and operations efficiency in your organization, like how you can drive more leverage into your organization, and then if needed, how to appropriately right size your organization. If you need to compress the size of your sales organization, what are the appropriate ways of doing that in a way that's going to preserve as much value for your organization as possible. So With that, I think kind of like the biggest thing here is this notion of like pivoting from a growth first to efficiency first business. We're seeing this quite a bit across our customers right now, where organizations that historically were just like adding AEs, adding SDRs, adding, are now, and even if those account executives or SDRs weren't maybe the most efficient in the world, and like maybe they weren't even covering their own nut, like it kind of didn't matter as long as they were adding more ARR, adding more pipe to the to the organization, and now that's changing. And instead, the perception is like, hey, look, we need our account executives being highly highly efficient. We need that, like, more of our account executives hitting quota. We need more of our SDRs hitting quota, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you're kind of pivoting from the one to the other, there are a couple things that you have to kind of figure out there. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be figuring out new baselines for your organization. You're going to be driving effort and efficiency, and then you're going to be driving more management and operational efficiency in your organizations as well, and then potentially having to right size your team. So first, let's go ahead and talk about finding new baselines here. And so the idea around finding new baselines is that when something changes in the market, oftentimes there are new realities where when your go-to-market function interfaces with the market. It might be harder to get opportunities into your pipe. It might be harder to get first meetings on the calendar if you're an SDR team. The win rates might be going down. Deal cycles might be elongating as you have to add a CFO facing meeting, for instance, or any number, like ASP, average selling prices, might compress as organizations are seeking to maybe buy less of something. And so when you're like, if these realities are showing up in your business, it's important for you to understand that that's the case, and understand what those new baselines are, such that then you can cascade those to maybe new expectations, new goals and quotas, and then enforcing those baselines and what have you. And so what we're going to talk about here is like, okay, so if I have to do that, what are the things that I'm going to, what do I have to do? We're going to kind of talk about how there's kind of a key set of KPIs that you might want to re-benchmark there. Largely, it's just the revenue formula, and then the pipeline the revenue formula for AEs, and then the pipeline formula for SDRs. Kind of like these guys right here. These are like our pipeline and bookings formula laminates that we use for to give to our customers and prospects. In fact, actually, I think we can drop a link if people want to sign up for those. But yeah, you'll be looking at bookings, new ops, win rate, average selling price, and deal cycle on the AE side of things. And then on the SDR side of things, you're going to be looking at the SDR pipeline formula with ops created, new accounts, new contacts, ops created, and maybe ops created per accounts engaged. And so then the thing for folks to be aware of there is, okay, great. Like, what is the new sampling period that what is the sampling period where it makes sense for us to understand what those new baselines might be? In general, like, that's probably going to be for AEs. It's going to be like one sales cycle, at least. For SDRs, it's going to be a little bit faster than that. And so kind of some examples of what this might look like in practice. These are some screenshots from a customer's anonymized Atrium instance here. And you can kind of see like the change. This is customer facing meeting volume going from what had previously been baseline of 20 customer facing meetings a week for this team down to about like half of that. This was actually around kind of initial COVID stuff. So this is like a pretty pronounced difference there. And then kind of see something similar here with email engagement rate with SDR. So this is an example of a metric where that measures how responsive customers are being to to SDRs, and you can see like the responsiveness rate kind of dropped off substantially there. Point being that if these metrics are going to change, that's going to impact your go-to-market, and so being aware of that so you can then cascade it to the rest of your plan makes a lot of sense there. So like this is the sort of thing that you'll be looking for, is where you see like a jump between like what was a prior steady state approach or a prior steady state and kind of the new steady state there.
Pete, on that aspect,
cool.
before
And
we
then,
move on,
please.
So one of the things that I've been seeing with certain sales leaders, it seems to be accepted that the market has obviously changed with upper leadership and second level managers, but sometimes with first level managers, and especially with ICs, it's sort of the denial stage comes first, right? So what is it between the difference of, oh, I can't get ops because it's summer and, you know, people are out of town and my reps are out of town, like this is an anomaly, the market's not really affecting me. How do you sort of navigate the differences of like coming to acceptance of this needs to be the new baseline compared to, oh, these are just fake anomalies that it'll change come fall?
Interesting. Like that. What's the best way of contending with that, do you think?
So I've been pretty ruthless in the way that I'm trying to help managers come about this. It's sort of like the data doesn't lie and what we're seeing is true. And, you know, a lot of times it's like, I want to not see the anomalies, but I think that's just human nature, right? Of like, oh, there's a problem, I'm going to put blinders on. But I think where we are right now, it's power to look at the data, to open your eyes to it, and then try to figure out, like you were talking about, the better way of getting efficiency out of the team. But will it, do you find, change in the fall? Do you think that things will sort of uptick a little bit more and that summer comes to play a little bit with this and seasonality as well? Or do you think that this is sort of true for all SaaS at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I think that a way of contending with that, of course, and this is where I know our customer success team does a lot of work in helping people or like doing kind of benchmarks across our various customers, because we have, you know, nearly 300 customers at this point. Helping someone say like, hey, look, and actually we'll talk about this in the riff section, right? The compressing the sales team section. If it's an individual or a couple of individuals, then it maybe might not actually be organization wide, right? It might not be org wide. If it is org wide, but then importantly, it's not showing up in other customer, you know, instances, because like some companies have more recession resistant businesses, then what we can say is like, hey, I hear what you're saying there. That said, like, you know, given the fact that I interact with like dozens and dozens of companies data and companies metrics, I can tell you that like this is not showing up in other this is not showing up in broadly across everybody's sales motion. This seems to be this seems to be localized for you guys, and as a result, you should be mindful of that. I think that's probably a good way of going about that. Wonderful. So I think thank you for calling that out, Majean. I appreciate that. So once you kind of know what these new baselines are, then of course you should just like cascade that throughout the rest of the way that you think about your team. So like, you know, the AE bookings formula. So total number of ops that are being carried, win rate, ASP divided by deal cycle. What that will do is that will show you what sort of expectation you should have around bookings for a given period. And then you can do the same thing, of course, in SDR land. And so, for instance, if all of a sudden now your win rates are compressing, these are not win rates, this is email engagement rate, which is kind of like an SDR win rate. It's like, do you win the email exchange, if you will, get people to respond back? But if all of a sudden your win rate goes down by, I don't know, 30% or so, well, that means that either we have to be comfortable with our bookings being that much lower, or alternatively, we have to drive up the number of opportunities that our AEs are able to manage at any given point in time. And so this is an example of like, once you figure out what that new baseline might be, then you have to cascade it to other things, or sorry, to the rest of the revenue formula, the pipeline formula, or else going to be setting yourself up for a situation where you're surprised in 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, whatever your deal cycle is there. Kind of second topic here, or at least like relatedly, is what is the appropriate sampling period? And so really what that is, so like how do you kind of, actually to your point, Majean, about, well, okay, do I know that this isn't seasonality, or do I know that this isn't temporary, et cetera, et cetera? So the way to kind of think about that is that that's going to be related to, one, how many reps that you have. So if you have like a bunch of reps, then you actually like you actually don't need a very long sampling period, because you actually have a lot of data already. Because if you have like 100 rep, SDR team or something like that, then kind of the amount of time required for like statistical significance there, or at least comfort, is like probably pretty quick. In a smaller organization, it might take a little bit longer. Same is true with like sales motion velocity. If you have a much sales motion, like if you're a 30-day sales cycle or 45-day sales cycle, well, like, pretty quickly you should be able to have a sense of like what a new win rate might look like, or what have you. In a longer, more elongated period deal cycle, like enterprise, is going to take a little bit longer. And this is probably why it's important for you to pay attention to more leading indicators there, deteriorations of leading indicators like opportunity conversion rates, et cetera, et cetera. Also, you're going to want to be mindful of precursor metrics versus output metrics. So changes will show up more quickly in precursor metrics. So like, email response rate, or like conversion rate from first meeting to second meeting, if you're talking about account executives, or conversion rates out of like meeting pending, right? No-show rates, conversion rate from stage 0 to stage 1, or stage 1 and stage 2. Those are more precursor metrics, versus an output metric might be something like a win rate, or bookings, or wins, or what have you. So paying more attention to those precursor metrics, like that's where like early indications will show up more quickly there. And so you can kind of see what this looks like in practice here. So this is like prospect responsiveness for a 10 rep outbound SDR team here. This is like the email engagement rate example we were using before. This is an output metric, at least for SDRs, right? So opportunity creation, you can see that there was a 30% decline in op creation. This is a fairly large organization. This is like a 50-person SDR organization. So, it's pretty statistically significant, because like a 50-person SDR organization, you're going to be able to see what things look like pretty quick there. And then you can kind of see a similar situation here with like activity per opportunity created. So this is an Atrium kind of efficiency metric that SDR organizations use in order to see like how many activities are required in order to generate an op. And you can see that there's like a 20% jump here in the amount of activities that are required in order to create an op, which kind of goes back to this thing up here, right? I'm saying, okay, cool. If it turns out that like we got 20% less less efficient, because people, for whatever reasons, people are being like less email responsive, or not picking up the phone to respond to us, then we need to up our activity levels in order to get the same number of opportunities coming out of there. And the same kind of shows up on the AE side as well. So in this case, you can see this is like the average number of customer-facing meetings per AE per week. And you can see that they dropped from around like 8 or so to around like 4-ish here. But customer-facing meetings are pretty good. Like, it's a precursor metric, because like, you're having meetings all week long. Like, it takes a number of meetings in order to get to a close one deal there. The other thing you have to be mindful of is like, is it actually the average? So like, this is an average right here, right? This is, average number of customer facing meetings, and then right here as well. But sometimes what can happen is you can actually have a handful of reps who are persisting in their execution, while others are potentially degrading. And this is actually kind of related to the thing we're going to talk about later around compressing a sales organization. But if it turns out that you actually have a number of reps who aren't being negatively impacted, well, then maybe actually the average is not, the average is just being dragged down by some people who are underperforming for whatever reason. You should address that, as opposed to saying like, oh, okay, this is actually the average for the team. And so a good way of doing that is just to make sure that when you're looking at an average, you actually break it out into the constituent parts, the individual reps, just to make sure that it is pretty uniform across the entire team there. Cool. So then once you've kind of seen what those new baselines look like, you're comfortable that it had the sampling period is appropriate, then what you want to do is set new goals on that and cascade it to the rest of the organization. And so what that might mean is it might mean new quotas, or it might just mean changes of the goals that like inform quotas. So in the example earlier, if win rates have gone down, then perhaps but our AEs aren't fully utilized from a customer facing meeting volume standpoint, well, then that could indicate to us that they can manage more ops, right? So we can bump up the number of ops that we might set goals on, like say, hey, at any given point in time, you should have 30 ops or 40 ops or what have you. And we know that you can do that because your calendar is not completely slammed with customer facing meetings. And if you do this, then you'll be able, like, there is a path to quota execution here. Once you've set those new goals, or set those new quotas, then it's really important to publish that information, to like reset expectations. Say, hey, remember how we used to have an expectation that you have 20 ops in your pipe? Now there's an expectation 30, and like you're going to be responsible for self-sourcing them. Or we used to have like the previous quote unquote normal was 25% win rates. We are now modeling an expectation that win rates are at 20%. And then once you've published this, you want to drive accountability on that. And so what that means is just weaving it into your operating rhythm, making sure that you're consuming those metrics in order for you to like use your eyeballs in order to say, hey, are we at these new goals? And if we're not, what do we have to do in order to remediate things? Wonderful. So that's section one, essentially on finding kind of new baselines. The next section that we're going to talk about is driving level of effort and efficiency in teams. And so like this is kind of a funny like topic, because oftentimes people are like, oh yeah, like we're working really hard all the time. I would actually argue that it's like oftentimes not the case, especially in good times. Right? Like we see this across because we have access to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies performance data. Like you'd be surprised the level of kind of hustle, if you will, in some organizations. And so the cool thing is that there are when you have a exogenous kind of like shock, right? Like you have when you have a situation where there is there's an economic shock or whatever, you can use it as an opportunity to kind of like re-baseline expectations and say like, hey, look, here's a situation, right? Like, we're going to have to take our effort up 20% in order to execute here, or like there's going to be problems for the organizations, which means it's potentially going to be problems for people's roles and what have you. It's maybe like not the most comfortable conversation in the world, but it can be really helpful when you're coming out of a scenario, like when you're coming out of a cult may have been informed by this reality right here, where it was like harder to kind of hold people accountable, potentially harder to hold people accountable to like a certain level of effort and levels of efficiency. But this is going to be kind of like an opportunity to kind of like refresh things, right? Like, okay, cool. Like there's a new reality, and this is like, we're going to shed the old skin, and like, this is the new skin that we're going to wear here. And so one way to kind of think about what the things to do there is to think about, measuring and setting expectations and goals around inputs, outputs, and efficiency metrics. So like effort inputs, outputs, and efficiency metrics. These are some examples of like KPIs. These are SDR KPIs right here. You can see that these are the input ones here, output ones right here, and efficiency and quality ones here. So SDR ones here, AE ones here, CSAM ones here. And so by kind of like selecting some of these and setting goals on them, what you can do is help change that kind of expectation around level of effort and level of efficiency there. So as I like to say, kind of like moving from a marathon pace to being, moving to a quote unquote chased by a bear pace there. And so like the first thing to pay attention to is to like look at level of effort metrics. You'd really be surprised by like the variability in level of effort metrics. It's like, it's fairly surprising when you go and actually look, because what you want to do is look at your top performers and say like, hey, look, like these people aren't magic, right? Like they're not putting in 50% more hours or what have you. They're just like more focused. They put their nose to the grindstone. And so you'd be really surprised where like the number of, like this is an example of customer facing meeting volumes for over a trailing 30-day period for an AE team. This is a mid-market AE team. And you can see like there's some folks that are like, nearly 50% lower than than not just like the average here, but also you can kind of see like where the top performer tier is here. And this isn't to say that your expectations should be that everybody is at the same level as top performers, but that doesn't mean that, but like maybe being in the mix there is not an unreasonable expectation there. And so you can kind of see this with respect to some other KPIs as well. This is meetings on calendar right here. This is accounts touched. Again, you can see some pretty substantial variation here. This is again, I think this is an account executive team here where the top performers are about 40% higher than everybody else. This is email volume here. Again, all these people have the same exact role. They have the same exact role. And so you would expect that they would be more tightly banded than this. And yet you do see that the substantial difference between the top performers, the mid performers, and some of the underperformers here. And so setting expectations that really like people should be in here, right? That can help you pull up. In this case, you can kind of see there's probably like maybe about 30% of the team is like kind of banded down here, and you can pull them up by using the opportunity to set expectations there. This is call volume as well, and then this is SDR accounts touched there. Majean, do you know this kind of level of variability within some of the customers that you work with that's kind of like eye-opening to managers?
Almost everybody. And I think one of the really fascinating things with talking about being in a downturn where we are, a lot of people are coming with sort of two things. They are hearing from their managers that unfortunately they have to make, I don't know, a 20% cut, for instance, or they're hearing that, we need some good performance coaching and performance plans for underachievers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first question is, how do you spot those underachievers, right? So first you've got to identify those key metrics, like what you're talking about, those really leading indicators of account touches, meetings on calendars, how many like email correspondences are they getting back and forth with their prime opportunities? And then it's sort of trying to identify the top performers versus this. So the deviation is huge in almost every organization. And when you start looking at the graphs like this, it's just so clear. So then being able to identify, our bottom performers here, just sort of having that goal line of here's where you need to be. And then in those weekly one-on-ones, making sure that they are reaching towards that goal and with the hopes of surpassing it, right? And you've seen it go both ways. They either really reach hard and they surpass the goal and they are adding to the team and being a key player there, or they turn off and then it's sort of time to part ways. But it seems to go one of two directions there.
Nice. Yes. Yeah, it kind of like forces a conversation either way, which I think can like be very healthy for organizations, right? Like, hey, maybe it turns out that like you actually just don't like being an SDR. Maybe it turns out that like being an AE is like not is like not your jam, right? And like let's just let's just be aware of that. Same thing is true with respect to what I call kind of like standards of excellence and efficiency. So one of the things that is a pretty big mindset change for a lot, especially the case for AEs, also SDRs too, like inbound SDRs, where there's like maybe an attitude of like, oh well, there's more where that came from, right? Versus every opportunity or lead is kind of precious, and so paying attention to like level of excellence and efficiency metrics. With AEs, that's going to be like win rates, opportunity conversion rates, pipeline hygiene metrics, et cetera, et cetera. Those are going to be like really like important to pay attention to. The same is true with like SDRs, like the email engagement rate, the efficiency with which they convert the accounts that they're interacting with to opportunities, et cetera. And so kind of some examples here. Again, you can kind of see, oops, let's go back to this. So this is untouched opportunities. This is a very popular Atrium metric right here. This is the number of opportunities that haven't been in a given account executive's pipeline that haven't been touched in 30 days. And so you can kind of, it's a measure of pipeline hygiene. And so you can see that there's some reps down here that are like really on top of their game, right? They only have like 2, 3, 4 untouched opportunities at any given point in time. Then you kind of have folks that are in the middle of the pack here. They have some ops in their pipe. And again, this isn't like, hey, you have to be touching your ops every 7 days. This is like, hey, your opportunities haven't been like, these opportunities haven't been touched for 30 days, right? Like they're not being worked. And so you can kind of see a pretty big variation right there. Same is true with like multi-threading, right? Like if you're not engaging with sufficient contacts within an account, that's really kind of problematic because you're not working that op the way that like you ought to be working that op. And again, you can kind of see that here of reps that are substantially worse than everybody else at multi-threading. There's an opportunity to coach them up, or alternatively say like, hey, look, if you're not going to work these opportunities the way that you're supposed to, we're not going to give you more opportunities, right? Until you fix that. The same with kind of conversion rates here. This is a more sophisticated Atrium KPI here, where you can have, it has the stages for the organization at the bottom here, and then you can see the conversion rate from each stage here, and you can see that you have a couple of reps that are, they convert their ops out of each stage at a fairly high clip, and then you have other folks that really seem to have a pretty leaky pipeline, right? So they're only converting ops out of the stages at anywhere between 5 to 10% there. And so if you look at this right here, if you're not able to fix this, it's pretty wasteful to continue to give opportunities to these account executives, because they're not free. Marketing paid good money for those opportunities. The SDR team kind of hustled their buns to get these meetings on the calendar, and yet if if the conversion rates aren't there, that's a problem there. And you can kind of see the same thing on the flip side with respect to SDRs here around email response rates. Here you can see some of these SDRs have much lower email responsiveness or email engagement rates than their peers, and then we have other ones who are much higher there. And so same sort of thing with like leads or contacts or what have you, which is like, look, if you're going to work your leads or contacts and you're not going to work them in a way that's going to drive success, then maybe we should be cycling those to other folks there as well. Another example of one of these efficiency metrics would be accounts touched to op creation here. So it's like, hey, here are your 200 accounts, here are your 300 accounts that you're going to work. You can see that there's some reps here that are substantially lower with respect to that ratio than some of these other folks as well. And so that's like one way of setting expectations there, is to look at like the teams and kind of the inter-organization benchmarks. The other way that you can do this is to do what I call like bottoms up setting. We actually do a masterclass on goal setting here, where we talk about from a bottoms up standpoint, looking at, okay, there's 40 hours in a week, there's 50 hours in a week. How much actual like space on the calendar and work would you expect folks to be doing? So for AEs, that might be like, how many meetings does an opportunity take to work? What is the other work that an AE has to do between meetings, whether that's proposals or product configuration or whatever. If there's not a lot of that, then maybe you can have an expectation that AE should have higher meeting volumes. If they have a bunch of other stuff that they have to do, like RFP responses or proposal writing or fiddling with products, et cetera, then maybe the expectations would be lower there. And the same is kind of true on the SDRs as well. So you can kind of do a bottoms up analysis and say, how much time should they be spending on A, B, and C? And then that should then back into the goals that you would set associated with that. And then once you do that, you should really publish expectations. And you'd be shocked. I mean, it's kind of hilarious. Organizations oftentimes, and this is why it's part of actually the Atrium implementation motion, is to help organizations do this, because it's one thing to kind of know what the levels ought to be. But if you're 20 SDRs or 40 AEs don't know what those expectations are, and instead they only know what their opportunity creation quota or their bookings quota is, well, now you're kind of relying on a bunch of 24-year-olds, 28-year-olds, 32-year-olds, what have you, to kind of derive the goals for the precursors, which is not really a successful thing. So Majean, I know that you and your team do a lot of stuff around this, around helping organizations both set goals and then also publish expectations. What sort of impact have you seen when organizations just get a lot more transparent around publishing these expectations to their teams?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think just the other day, somebody on the team mentioned that they were meeting with a manager who said that he had seen an 80% increase in bookings because of monitoring the leading indicators and through the goals. Tracking, here's our quota all the way down to, okay, if this is your quota, here's how much money you are in theory making in bookings per week, per meeting, and then filtering that down to how many meetings per week you need to be having, how many accounts you need to be touching. Putting 0 as untouched ops, right, to where things are just constantly being in action. It's vital, and it can, I mean, sky's the limit with what it can do. But I know personally, we've just seen one that's been an 80% increase this past quarter.
That sounds like a pretty sweet little verified business outcome for us to record there.
It was.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, super fabulous. Wow, that is a non-trivial impact there that kind of derives from kind of paying attention to those precursors. And then the last thing that I would kind of note here around kind of setting new levels of expectations here would be around what I call implementing a metrics harness. This is something that this is something that Atrium helps organizations with, getting metrically driven, making it very, very easy for them to have the assets to have to eyeball these various metrics to help drive higher performance, and also, I mean, other things as well, right? Inspecting, diagnosing issues and kind of taking out performance and spreading to the rest of the team, but certainly helping organizations get metrically driven for the purposes that we're describing. First and foremost, you want to make sure that you're doing a good job of visualizing these various metrics that we were kind of talking about before. Whatever it is that you're setting expectations on, you then need to visualize them in order to be able to back check, right? So we publish the expectations around how many ops AE should have in their pipe, how many new ops should be showing up on a weekly basis, how many customer facing meetings they should be having. Then we actually have to visualize that so we can see whether or not they are getting to those levels that we set. And then importantly, it's insufficient just to kind of set those expectations, but what we want to do is also make sure that information is being appropriately distributed and then being consumed. Because if you have, it's the joke we like to say is if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, does it actually make a noise? Similarly, if you have a world-class SDR performance dashboard, but ain't nobody looking at it, are the SDRs actually doing anything, right? Or are they off golfing or whatever. I guess AEs would be golfing. SDRs might be doing something else. So you got to make sure that that information is being distributed. You got to make sure that it's being consumed. And so the way that you do that is, one, we're a big fan of automated distribution. So here at Atrium, one of the kind of the most popular features of Atrium is like the ability to put together these what we call views. So like dashboards, alert feeds, op health views, goal sets, etc., and then distribute them out, right? So like make sure that they're coming to people, they're meeting them where they are in their email inbox, in their Slack inbox, in Slack, etc. So that's one thing that's very powerful. The other thing is what I call meeting-based consumption. So making sure that you have this information woven into the operating rhythm of all of your meetings. And like, so, you have certain assets that are present for review in your stand-up meeting that happens every day at 9 a.m. or every day at like 12 p.m. Or you have certain assets that are reviewed in your sales team meeting, right? Or your weekly sales team meeting. So making sure that those assets are hyperlinked from those various agenda docs can be very powerful there. Majean, any kind of like commentary on like distribution, like helping people be more on top of things by making sure that metrics and metrical assets are being distributed appropriately?
Yeah, the best driver for especially like helping managers, even myself with it, is making sure that all of the distributions are actually going to the team at large as well, because the reps are going to come with questions and they're going to come with information and they're going to want to understand the metrics and why they are the way they are. So if the reps are seeing it and then it's driven to the managers, I think it really helps. Also, like making sure that certain views are shared with even the managers, management, and top level leadership as well, so that the whole org is really
Exec level.
transparent. Yeah.
Yeah, exec level. What's so important about that?
I mean, the exec level is sort of the decision-making process, right? So they need to be aware of what's happening at the rep level, at the management level, at the team level, so that good decisions can be made whenever quotas are being considered and budgets are being considered, that they see what's going on and what the sales team's capable of doing so that good decisions can come to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I love it. Wonderful. Cool. So now let's talk about sales management and sales and like operational efficiency here. So the like, I think beyond, like, there's driving higher levels of effort and kind of output, and then there's also just like getting leverage as well. And so I think there's some really great ways that sales managers can raise their level of excellence. And so what that means is, like, by being a better manager, that's a great way of driving more performance out of your organization, right? So that can mean better managerial cadences, being a better data-driven manager, and potentially having a bigger span of control. So instead of managing 6 reps, you can manage 8 reps, right? Now, of course, that can be a two-edged sword, because the larger the span of control, potentially you have like less managerial oversight, which can have negative impacts on win rates and things like that, unless of course you're doing a good job of having data-driven, you're using data and metrics to be able to manage more of those folks. And this is actually something that we see with our customers at Atrium, is the number of reps that a manager can pay attention to and kind of like tend to ends up being higher when you're using metrics in order to manage those folks, because it's not, you're not using management by osmosis, like riding along on all these calls and things like that in order to understand that so-and-so's got a problem, so-and-so's got a problem, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you're using metrics. And so what you can do is you can see around corners there. On the sales operations side, efficiency is really the big thing there. And that can be like automation as much as possible, looking to automate things, getting sales ops focused on inefficiencies and leverage. And so this is kind of like a visualization of how we talk about this. Like, these are the different kind of jobs to be done here on a levels here. And the value, kind of like activity value, is higher the higher up you go. The more you can automate like these kind of things down here versus having people do them manually, the better off that you're at. And Atrium ends up automating a number of these, like distributing metrics or building one-off reports or what have you. Those are all things that like software can automate. Atrium automates that. There's a number of other things, like, I don't know, like running compensation might be a good example of this, right? So it might make sense to invest in a compensation management automation tool that you've been kind of kicking down the road, so sales operations can spend more time doing more important things, and just automate that as opposed to throwing human bodies at it, right? So these are some kind of examples of this. So for sales management, better managerial cadences. Now's the time to double down on being a better management, being more data driven so you can get ahead of problems quicker, identify successful strategies, and drive that higher level of effort we were talking about previously. So getting better at data driven management is like there's no time like the now in that case. And of course, we talked about bigger spans of control, right? So it turns out if a manager goes from managing 6 reps to managing 9 reps, like you're talking about, that's increasing span of control by 50%. You're saving $100,000 a year in sales management salary expense right there, by not necessarily having to have like another. This of course only works when you're at a very large scale, or not very large, but like a sufficiently large scale where you can potentially not hire that incremental manager, and save yourself that salary expense. And then of course the same thing on the automation side with sales operations. So the last topic we're going to kind of touch on here is, in the situation where you have to right size your organization, what's the way to what's the right way to do this? So there's kind of 2 big topics there. One, what is the right size for your organization? What is required? And then who do you need to offboard? Which can be a fraught thing. So this right here, conveniently, a lot of the work that we talked about previously would serve this purpose. So if you realize that your AEs were operating at 60% capacity, now what you could do is you could drop some of your account executive, and that means like 8 meetings a week versus like 12 to 15. What you could do is you could say, okay, well, that probably means that I could drop maybe like 20% of my AE team and still get the same level of capacity out of them. We don't want to make sure that we don't want them to overclock, right, and have negative impacts on the win rate. But if it turns out through kind of our inspection, right, wherever we were, right, if it turns out from our inspection that folks were operating at lower capacity than they could have been, then there's slack there, and we can pick that slack up. And the same is true kind of on the SDR side. So then once you've decided what the right level should be, then you have to go into and start with and figure out who should potentially go. And so first, the way that you're going to do that is you're going to start with output underperformers. So you're going to look at AEs who have low bookings or SDRs who have low opportunities creation to find the set of folks that essentially would be like offboarding candidates. And then what's important is to look at what is popularly known as will versus skill metrics there. So if you have people who have low will metrics, which essentially are like LOE, level of effort metrics, usually those are probably the people that are going to be better to offboard, because my point of view on that is you should have been performance managing those folks from the get-go. But sometimes, again, in times of plenty, we can get lackadaisical. And then what you also want to do is look at the efficiency and skill metrics there. Generally speaking, those can be impacted if somebody has the will. Oftentimes you can clean that up, you can help glow that up again through better management and better data-driven management, but not always, right? If they've been consistently low for a long amount of time, if somebody has good will metrics, but also just has abysmal skill metrics, well, they might be a candidate for offboarding as well there. And so what we're going to do here is kind of look through what this might look like in practice. So this is trailing. This is like I think this is like a trailing 6-month sampling period for for a prototypical organization. You could see like these folks right here were all already ramped. This person's in ramp right here. You can see pretty quickly that you got some riff candidates here. This is a riff candidate. This is right here because their bookings are low. And then you can and then what I did here was also look at wins just to make sure that there wasn't a situation where maybe somebody had like a lower number of wins, but we're kind of getting bailed out by a higher average selling price. And so what you can kind of see here is that like, Mr. Woolensworth, Little Debbie, and Jerry Jumbo there are kind of riff candidates. And then of course, yeah, it's those same people. It's not anybody new there. Then importantly, what you want to do is you want to look over time. So if for whatever reason somebody had like a divot in a given quarter, but like historically they've been much higher than that, you would just want to make sure that you're not potentially offboarding somebody who just like had an issue in a given quarter and then kind of bounced back. So in this case, you can kind of see the blue guy right here, Mr. Woolensworth, who is one of the folks in here. He's just kind of a consistent low performer there. You can see he's like much lower than his peers. You can see Mr. Purple here, which is Little Debbie. You can see that she's pretty up and down with respect to performance. Like one quarter got a little bit higher there, but if she had been at her previous averages, she actually would have been even like lower than this right here. She just maybe had a swing deal here, and then this Alice Bluebonnet right here, you can see that this person's in ramp. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're immune from being considered for potential offboarding there, but what you'd have to do is inspect a little bit more clearly. And then you can kind of see the same thing with respect to wins here. Mr. Woolensworth and Little Debbie are consistently low with respect to their volume of wins. Cool. So those are output metrics, and then what you can see, these are our will metrics here. So we're looking at meeting volumes here during the same time period. What's interesting here is like these are our riff candidates: Woolensworth, Little Debbie, and Jerry here. And we can actually see that Little Debbie has like pretty substantial level of effort metrics there. So that actually might kind of indicate to me like there might be something, like there might be a reason that we hang on to her, because like the will is there and like the hustle is there, and so maybe we can glow up her level of execution there. And then this is like another kind of example as well. You can see accounts touched here. So you can see that, Mr. Woolensworth is fairly light. Jerry is fairly light. Little Debbie is actually fairly light with respect to account interaction, which actually might indicate to me what her issue is. Like if she's having lots and lots and lots of meetings, but not engaging with substantially more opportunities or accounts, that tells me that she's having lots of like fruitless meetings, if you will, right? She's kind of getting like friend zoned, if you will. And that would probably show up in her conversion rates there. Again, not surprising, that's a skill metric, right? Cool. And then if we look at, again, this over time here, we can see that Mr. Woolensworth is fairly consistent low meeting activity. Interestingly, Jerry Jumbo here actually has degradation in his skill or his will metric here of meetings on calendar. So that tells me that like if I'm probably going to compress this sales organization, I'm like Mr. Woolensworth and Jerry are probably the ones that are going to go there. And then of course, like we can go and look at our like skill metrics here. Looks like folks are fairly consistent with respect to their win rate, so it's like not super problematic there. But what you can see is so that's great, but like these will metrics are just like not here. So in that situation, what I would say is it looks like you could compress a number of folks, or like you could compress part of that AE team. It does look like Mr. Woolensworth and Jerry would be the ones who we probably would offboard there because they have a consistent low level of effort. Little Debbie, on the other hand, does look like she has an opportunity to jump up there. there wasn't really much of a win rate differentiation between different folks. And so if we wanted to reduce headcount, we would probably reduce Mr. Wollensworth and Jerry there and not have negative impacts across the rest of the team. In fact, if we look at our win rates here, probably what we would want to do is give these guys as opportunities to Principal Major, Chair Mouse, and and Alice Bluebonnet here with the fantastic win rates there. So wonderful. I think we're at time here. We may have lost Majean because she might be off to go implement somebody, unfortunately. But I had a really fantastic time. I hope you guys did as well. We'll send this recording out after the fact. And again, if you want to sign up for that complimentary sales management or leadership bootcamp with that Atrium hosts on a monthly basis with Richard Harris, it's $1,000 value. We're going to go ahead and drop that hyperlink here in the chat. You can also scan the QR code right there if you want to sign up for that. Hey, Joni, what's up?
Hi, Pete. How we doing?
I'm hanging in there. All right. Anything else we need to cover?
I think we are all set to go. You wrapped me up nice and easy. So thank you so much, Pete. Of course, thank you to Majean. And thank you to everyone here. I'll be sending you a follow-up. You'll have access to these slides as well as the recording. We're set to go.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks.